I used to believe regret was something you earn at the end of life, something slow, something distant, something that only arrives when your time is almost gone. I was wrong. Because at 88 years old, I realized regret doesn't wait for death. It lives with you every single day. I'm Henry Calloway, and for most of my life I thought I was doing everything right. I stayed safe, I avoided mistakes, I built a life people respected. But there was one question I never asked myself, until a young man looked at me in a quiet nursing home and said, "If you could change one thing in your life, what would it be?" I should have said something simple, something normal. But what came out instead changed everything I thought I knew about my life, because my answer wasn't a mistake I made. It was the life I never lived, and once I said it out loud, I could never take it back. Rain has a strange way of making old memories louder. That evening, the windows of the nursing home trembled softly beneath the storm, and the smell of burnt coffee drifted through the hallway like it always did after dinner. Most of the residents were gathered around the television, pretending to watch some old Western movie nobody really cared about. And me? I was sitting alone in the corner, same brown sweater, same cold cup of coffee, same silence. After enough years, people stop asking why you're quiet. They just decide that's who you are. I preferred it that way. Then that kid sat beside me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. I looked over slowly, young face, tired eyes, couldn't have been older than 24. "Free country," I muttered. He laughed softly. "Daniel, that usually means you're not going to tell me your name. Usually means I don't care to." He smiled anyway. Funny thing about young people, they still think patience can fix loneliness. For a few minutes we just listened to the rain. Then he said quietly, "You always sit here alone?" "I always breathe too." "That bad, huh?" I shrugged. "You volunteering here or hiding from your own life?" That caught him off guard. "Maybe both," he admitted. I looked at him more carefully then. There was something familiar in his face, not the features, the exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying questions nobody can answer for you. "You're too young to look that lost," I said, "and you're too old to look that sad." That one landed harder than he realized. I stared back toward the rain tapping against the glass. "You got family?" he asked carefully. "Some dead, some distant. Same thing after enough time." Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't rush the silence. Most people do. That's why I didn't tell him to leave. "You ever regret anything?" he finally asked. I almost laughed. At 88 years old, regret becomes furniture. It sits beside you every morning. But I answered calmly, "Everybody regrets something. What about you?" I kept staring at the dark window. Outside, streetlights blurred through the rain like fading memories. Then Daniel asked the question nobody had ever asked me before. "If you could change one thing in your life," he said softly, "what would it be?" For a long moment I said nothing. Not because I didn't know, because I did, and the truth of it still hurt. Finally I whispered, "I only had one regret." Daniel leaned forward slightly. What was it? I could hear my heartbeat in the silence between us. Then I looked him straight in the eyes. "It wasn't failure," I said. "It wasn't losing money, or heartbreak, or mistakes." I swallowed slowly. My regret, I paused, was the life I never lived. The room suddenly felt smaller after that. Daniel didn't speak. Neither did I. The rain kept falling outside while 40 years of memories quietly reopened inside my chest. After a while, Daniel asked carefully, "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a second. Then I sighed. "You really want to know?" he nodded, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, I finally began telling the truth about my life. I don't know how long I sat there after I said it. The life I never lived. Daniel didn't interrupt. That was the strange part about him. He didn't rush silence like most people do. He just waited like he knew something was buried under it. And maybe he was right. Because when I finally spoke again, I wasn't in that nursing home anymore. I was somewhere colder. Somewhere older. I didn't grow up with comfort, I told him quietly. I grew up with pressure. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. Your childhood? I nodded once. Boston, I said. During the Depression. He didn't say anything, just listened. My voice lowered without me even trying. My father used to say one thing all the time. Daniel asked, what was it? I exhaled slowly. Don't embarrass me. A faint silence followed. I gave a short, tired laugh. That wasn't advice. That was a rule. A law. Daniel frowned a little. That sounds harsh. Harsh? I repeated. No. Harsh is a punch you recover from. This was slower. I looked down at my hands. If I dropped a glass, he didn't shout right away, I said. He'd just look at me. That silence was worse than yelling. Daniel leaned forward slightly. And your mother? That question hit softer. She tried, I said, but trying doesn't always mean saving. I paused. She used to fix things after he left the room, wipe my tears, tell me I was fine. But even she spoke quietly, like the walls were listening. Daniel said softly, so you were scared all the time? I shook my head. No, I corrected him. At first I wasn't scared. I looked toward the window again. I was just a kid. A long pause. Then mistakes started having consequences. I continued. Bad grades meant silence for days. Broken things meant disappointment that lasted longer than the damage. Daniel didn't move. So I learned something early, I said. My voice tightened slightly. If I don't try, I can't fail. That sentence hung between us. Daniel whispered, so you stopped trying? I let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh. No, I said. I stopped dreaming out loud. I leaned back in the chair. There was a boy in me once, I said, before all of this. He liked drawing things, building little stories in his head. He used to imagine becoming a photographer. Daniel's eyes lifted. Photographer? I nodded slowly. Not because I knew anything about it, I said, because I liked the idea of freezing moments, holding time still. A soft silence followed. Then I added, quieter, but in my house imagination wasn't useful. It was distraction. Daniel asked carefully, what happened to that boy? I didn't answer immediately, because I already knew. He learned, I finally said, that being quiet was safer than being wrong. I looked down again. I stopped asking questions in school, stopped raising my hand, stopped sitting near people who might notice me. Daniel frowned. You became alone on purpose. Yes, I said. At first it was choice. Later it became habit. A distant memory surfaced. I remember one time I said slowly, I got second place in a spelling test. Daniel smiled slightly. That's good. It wasn't in my house. His smile faded. My father didn't even ask what place I got, I continued. He just said, who beat you? Daniel exhaled under his breath. That's intense. It trained me, I said simply, to think nothing I did was ever enough. A quiet stretch of time passed. The rain outside hadn't stopped. It sounded heavier now. I didn't become broken overnight, I said. It was slow, like water wearing down stone. Daniel asked softly, is that when fear started? I nodded. Fear became easier than hope, I said, because hope asks for effort. Fear just asks you to stay still. I looked at him directly for the first time in a while, and I was very good at staying still. He didn't look away. That mattered more than he probably knew. Because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't said out loud in decades. I didn't just grow up afraid. I grew up learning how to live without ever being seen. I remember the first time I felt something other than fear. It didn't happen in my childhood. And it didn't happen slowly either. It happened on a train. I was 23, a long ride from Boston to New York City. I wasn't going for anything important, just a small job interview I already knew I wouldn't get. That was my pattern back then. Show up, try just enough, and expect disappointment so it wouldn't surprise me. I was sitting near the window when she arrived. She didn't ask if the seat was taken. She just pointed at it and said, "May I?" I nodded. That was the first mistake I made that changed everything. She sat down like she belonged everywhere she went. No hesitation, no shrinking, no apologizing for existing. After a few minutes, she looked at me and said, "You look like you're traveling somewhere you don't want to go." I blinked. "What makes you think that?" She smiled. "Because you're holding your bag like it might run away from you." I actually looked down at it. She laughed softly. "Relax. I'm not judging you," I said quietly. "Most people do." That made her pause. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Most people are busy pretending they're not scared themselves." I didn't respond. I didn't know how, so she introduced herself instead. "Eleanor, Henry," I said. She nodded like she was remembering my name instead of hearing it for the first time. And then she asked, "So, Henry, what do you do when you're not holding on to your bag for dear life?" I almost smiled. "Almost. I work," I said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." She tilted her head. "Everyone has more than one life inside them." I didn't understand what she meant, not yet. We talked for the entire ride. I don't even remember how it started anymore. One question became 10. 10 became hours. She told me she painted sometimes, not for money, not for approval, just because silence in her head turned into color when she did. "I don't trust people who don't create anything," she said. I asked why. She shrugged. "Because they usually destroy things instead." That stuck with me. At one point she asked, "What do you like, Henry?" I hesitated too long. She noticed immediately. "That pause," she said, "that's where your real life is hiding." I looked out the window. "I don't know." She leaned back. "That's not true. You just don't say it out loud." And then, quietly, she added, "You're careful, not because you're wise, because you're scared." I should have felt insulted. Instead, I felt seen. When the train finally reached New York City, I expected her to leave like a passing moment, but she didn't. She stood up, adjusted her coat, and said, "I'm meeting a friend for coffee." "Come with me," I hesitated. She raised an eyebrow. "Or are you busy not living your life again?" That made me stand up without thinking. That night she took me to a small jazz club in New York City. I had never been anywhere like it. Music wasn't just music there. It felt like it had weight, like it could touch you. Eleanor tapped the table and said, "This is what living sounds like." I said, "It's loud." She smiled. "So is fear. You just got used to that one." That line, I still remember it too clearly. Over the next weeks we kept meeting. Bookstores, streets, cheap diners. She talked about dreams like they were normal things people were allowed to have. I talked less. But for the first time, silence didn't feel like safety. It felt like missing something. One evening, she asked me, "What do you want to do with your life?" I said the usual thing, "I don't know yet." She looked at me longer than usual. Then she said softly, "You always say not yet, like life is something that waits for you." I didn't answer, because she was right. She found out I liked photography by accident. I had mentioned it once, quickly, almost embarrassed. The next day she brought me a used camera. I stared at it. "I can't afford this," I said. She shrugged. "Then don't think of it as something you can afford. Think of it as something you can start," I said. "I don't know what I'm doing," she smiled. "Nobody does. Some people just stop using that as an excuse." But even then, even with her, fear didn't leave me. It just became quieter, more polite. It started sounding like logic. Wait for stability, wait for the right time, don't risk too much. And Eleanor noticed. One night she said, "You keep living like everything important is always one decision away." I said nothing. She sighed softly. "Henry, you can't love life and postpone it at the same time." That was the first time I felt afraid of losing her, not because she would leave, but because I knew I might let her go without even meaning to. I wish I could say I changed after that night, after the jazz club, after the camera, after her words that stayed in my head like echoes I couldn't shut off. But fear doesn't disappear when you recognize it. It just learns new ways to speak. Eleanor started talking about San Francisco, not as a dream, as a plan. "We could go there," she said one afternoon, sitting on the steps outside a bookstore in New York City. "Real artists go there, Henry. You could actually do photography, not just hide behind it." I remember laughing nervously. "I don't think it's that simple." She looked at me like she already knew what I was going to say. "It usually isn't simple for people who wait too long," she replied. That silence after her words, it stayed between us longer than it should have. Days started changing shape after that. Not loudly, not dramatically, just small things. She would say, "Let's go." And I would say, "Let me think about it." She would say, "We should apply for that place." And I would say, "Maybe next week." She would look at me differently each time. Not angry, just farther away. One evening she finally said it directly. We were walking near the river. The water was moving fast, like it had somewhere urgent to be. She stopped walking. "Henry," she said. I stopped too. "I need to ask you something." I already knew what it was, but I still pretended I didn't. She turned toward me fully. "Do you actually want a future with me? Or am I just something you're postponing like everything else in your life?" My throat tightened instantly. "That's not fair," I said. She didn't raise her voice. "I'm not trying to be fair," she said. "I'm trying to understand you." I looked away, because if I looked at her too long, I might have answered honestly. And honesty felt dangerous. "I just don't want to rush things," I said finally. She nodded slowly. "That's what you always say." I tried to explain. "I need stability first. I need to be sure I can." She cut me off, softly but firmly. "You don't need stability, Henry. You need permission, and you're waiting for someone who's never going to give it to you." That hit deeper than I expected. For the next few days we barely spoke, not because of a fight, but because something was breaking quietly. Like glass cracking under pressure you don't notice until it's too late. Then came the letter. I found it on my small apartment table one morning. No envelope, just folded paper. Her handwriting was calm, too calm. I still remember the first line, "Henry, I love you. But I can't keep shrinking my life to fit your fear." I sat down immediately. My hands were shaking before I even finished reading. She wrote about San Francisco, about how she was leaving, about how she couldn't keep waiting for me to become someone I kept promising I would become later. And then the line that stayed with me forever, "You're so afraid of failing that you're failing at life." I read it once, then again. Then again, like repetition could change meaning. It didn't. I didn't go after her. That's the part people expect. That's the dramatic moment in stories where someone runs or screams or fixes everything. But real fear doesn't make noise. It makes you sit still. So I sat still. Days passed, then weeks. I told myself I would write to her when I was ready. I told myself she would understand later. I told myself a lot of things that sounded responsible, but really I was just afraid of being rejected by her twice, once by her leaving and once by trying. Eventually I stopped reading her letter. I folded it and placed it inside a drawer, not because I was over it, but because I wasn't. And life kept moving anyway. Work, routine, silence. Everything returned to normal. But normal was no longer peaceful. It was just quiet regret, learning how to breathe. I told myself I was fine after that life moves on, that people move on. But what actually happens is simpler than that. You just get used to not reaching for what you lost. I didn't go to San Francisco. I didn't write back. I didn't run after Eleanor. I stayed, and staying became a pattern. A year later, I met Margaret. She wasn't like Eleanor. No fire, no sharp edges, no questions that made me feel exposed. She was calm, predictable, safe, and at the time I thought that was enough. We got married quietly in a small ceremony in Boston. No big speeches, no emotional declarations, just two people agreeing to build something stable. I remember someone saying, "You two seem perfect together." I smiled like they were right. But inside I didn't feel perfect. I felt settled. There's a difference. I took a job in an office, paperwork, reports, numbers that didn't ask questions. It paid well. It was secure. People liked calling it responsible. I liked calling it quiet, because quiet didn't challenge me. We had a son a few years later. I remember holding him for the first time. He looked at me like I was something important. That was the first time I realized something terrifying. People believe fathers know what they're doing. Most of us are just improvising with a straight face. "Dad, why are you so quiet?" He asked once when he was small. I remember laughing softly. "I'm just thinking." He nodded like that made sense. Children accept simple answers. Adults stop asking questions. That's how distance begins. Margaret was kind. She made dinner, kept the house steady, never complained much. But we didn't talk deeply, not really. Our conversations stayed in safe places. Bills, plans, weather, anything that couldn't break us, or maybe anything that couldn't reveal us. Sometimes I would sit in the living room after everyone went to bed, just sitting, no noise, and that's when it would come back. Eleanor, not as a memory, as a feeling I hadn't resolved. I'd open the drawer sometimes, look at the old camera, the one she gave me. I never used it, not properly. I would hold it for a few seconds, then put it back. Like touching it too long might wake something I had buried. Years passed like that. Not painful enough to stop, not joyful enough to remember clearly, just consistent. People would say I was successful, good job, good family, good life, and I would nod, because nodding is easier than explaining emptiness. But there were moments, small ones, when my son laughed too loudly in the yard, when Margaret briefly rested her head on my shoulder while watching TV, when sunlight hit the kitchen table in a way that almost felt warm. In those moments I almost felt something, almost. But it never stayed, because somewhere underneath all of it, I was still the same boy who learned that mistakes meant silence. And silence had become my comfort, my protection, my cage. And the worst part? No one ever told me I was disappearing, because from the outside I looked exactly like a man who was living correctly. I didn't expect the heart attack. No one really does. It just happens on an ordinary day, in an ordinary body, like life suddenly decides to remind you it was never guaranteed. One moment I was at work, the next I was in a hospital bed in Boston, listening to machines counting my existence in steady beeps, beep, 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 like time refusing to slow down even when I finally needed it to. "Try not to move too much," the nurse said gently. I remember nodding. Even then I was still trying to be easy. That habit never left me. That night I was alone. Margaret had gone home to rest. My son was studying somewhere far away, building a life I had quietly helped shape but never fully understood. And for the first time in my life, there was nothing to do. No work, no distractions, no roles to play, just me. And silence. I stared at the ceiling for hours. I thought I would feel fear. But fear wasn't what came first. Memory came first. Eleanor's face appeared before anything else, not dramatic, not loud, just her voice in my head saying, "You always wait like life is going to pause for you." I closed my eyes. I didn't wait, I whispered to myself. I just prepared. But even I didn't believe that anymore. The memories kept coming, not the good ones, the unfinished ones, the photography camera I never used properly, the trips I postponed until someday, the conversations I avoided because they felt uncomfortable, the job offer I didn't pursue because it felt risky. Every moment I once called reasonable, now it all felt like something else, something heavier. A nurse checked on me at some point. "You okay?" she asked. I forced a smile. Just thinking. She nodded like that was normal. Everyone thinks thinking is harmless. It isn't. Not when it's too honest. Around 3 a.m., I asked to be left alone. The room went quiet again. That's when it hit me properly. Not pain. Clarity. I said it out loud, even though no one was there to hear it. I didn't fail at life. My voice sounded strange in the empty room. I avoided it. That sentence stayed in the air longer than I expected. Because it was true in a way I couldn't argue with anymore. I hadn't made one big mistake. I had made thousands of small ones, all designed to keep me safe, all designed to keep me still. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. Fear hadn't just influenced my life, it had replaced it. It chose my silence, my marriage, my job, my decisions, my timing. Everything I called practical was just fear wearing a respectable face. I turned my head toward the window. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars, lights, people going somewhere, always somewhere. And I realized I hadn't been going anywhere for a very long time. "I'm still alive," I whispered. But it didn't feel like a statement anymore. It felt like a question. That night didn't change everything, not immediately, because understanding something and changing it are two very different things. But something inside me had finally cracked open, and once you see your life clearly, you can't unsee it. I wish I could say I changed the moment I understood everything in that hospital room, but understanding is not the same as courage. For years after that night, I still lived half awake. I worked. I smiled when needed. I answered calls. I said I'm fine more times than I can remember, but something inside me stayed restless, like a door had opened in my mind, and I could never fully close it again. I was 78 when I finally did something I should have done decades earlier. I went looking for her, Eleanor. I didn't even know where to start at first. That alone made me laugh bitterly one morning in my small kitchen in Boston. 78 years old, I muttered to myself, and I don't even know how to find one person. Still, I tried. Old letters, forgotten names, small clues buried in memory. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't logical. It was desperate. One afternoon, I called Daniel, my son. "Do you know how to search for someone online?" I asked. There was a pause. "Dad, who are you trying to find?" I hesitated, then I said it. "Someone I should have never lost." He didn't ask more after that. He just helped. Weeks turned into months. Sometimes I felt ridiculous. Other times I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Because for the first time I wasn't waiting anymore. I was moving, even if I was afraid. Especially because I was afraid. Then one evening the phone rang. My son's voice was different. "Dad, I think I found her." My hand tightened around the receiver. "Where?" A pause. "Monterey." I remember sitting very still after that call ended. Monterey. The name didn't feel real. It felt like something from another life, and maybe it was. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept thinking about her face, not the young version I remembered, but the idea of who she might have become. And I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Do I even have the right to show up now? But the next morning, I still went. The journey to Monterey felt longer than it should have, not because of distance, because of everything I was carrying inside me. Regret, fear, hope I didn't trust, all sitting together quietly in the passenger seat of my life. When I finally stood in front of her house, I couldn't move for a moment. My hands were shaking, not from age, from memory, from everything I never said, from everything I should have done. I raised my hand to knock, then stopped. I whispered to myself, what if she doesn't want to see me? And immediately another voice answered inside me, what if she does? That was enough. I knocked. The door opened, and for a moment the world didn't make sense, because she was there. Eleanor, older, yes, changed, yes, but still her. Still the person who once made me feel like life was something I was allowed to live. She looked at me for a long time, no shock, no anger, just recognition. Like she had been expecting this moment more than I had. Then she said softly, "You're late." I tried to speak, but nothing came out. She studied my face carefully, and then, quieter than before, she added, "But you finally stopped being afraid." That sentence broke something open in me, not pain, release. I didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't offer it. We just stood there, two people who had lived separate lives shaped by the same unfinished story. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was running anymore. I came back from Monterey with something I didn't recognize at first. Not peace, not closure, something quieter than both. A kind of honesty I had never lived with before. Back in the nursing home in Boston, Daniel was waiting in the same corner where this whole story started. Same chair, same rain outside, same silence, but something between us had changed. "You went," Daniel said softly when he saw me. I nodded. I went. He studied my face for a moment. "Did you fix things?" I almost laughed. "No," I said. "I don't think life works like that." That made him look down, like he already suspected the answer. We sat for a while without speaking. Then Daniel asked, "So what now?" I leaned back in my chair. "Now I tell the truth," I said. He looked up. That got his attention. "You know what people get wrong about regret?" I asked him. He frowned slightly. "What?" "They think it comes from failure." I shook my head slowly. "It doesn't." Daniel stayed quiet. "It comes from," I continued, "not becoming who you were supposed to become." That line stayed in the air, heavy, simple, uncomfortable. Daniel whispered, "So you regret not trying harder?" I looked at him. "No," I said. "I regret letting fear decide what trying even looked like." He didn't respond immediately. He was thinking. I could see it. I leaned forward slightly. "Fear is quiet," I told him. "That's the dangerous part." Daniel asked, "What do you mean?" "It doesn't scream at you," I said. "It whispers. It says things like later and not now and be careful." I paused. And you think it's protecting you. Daniel nodded slowly, but really, I added, it's just stealing time from you, one small decision at a time. He looked down at his hands. You think I'm doing that? He asked quietly. I didn't answer right away, because the truth is I saw myself in him too clearly. I think everyone does, I said finally, until they don't have enough time left to pretend otherwise. That silence hit harder than I expected. After a while, Daniel said, I've been thinking about leaving this volunteer work, going back to school, but I keep telling myself I'm not ready. I nodded. That sounds familiar. He gave a small, tired laugh. So what did you do? He asked. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, I waited until I had no choice left but to face myself. He frowned. That's not really advice. No, I agreed. It's a warning. For the first time, Daniel didn't just listen to my story. He felt it. I could see it in his eyes, the shift. The uncomfortable realization that life wasn't something that happens later. It was something he was already in. And in that moment, I stopped feeling like just an old man telling stories and started feeling like something else, a reminder. I came back to the nursing home in Boston earlier than usual that morning. Daniel was already there. He was holding 2 coffees. One's yours, he said with a small smile. I thought we'd continue yesterday. I remember trying to sit up slowly. My body felt heavier than usual, but my mind was strangely light. That's kind of you, I said. He nodded. You were in the middle of something important. I almost smiled. I think I've been in the middle of it my whole life. But then something changed in the room. The nurses weren't rushing. They weren't panicked. Just quiet. Too quiet. Daniel noticed first. Is everything okay? He asked one of them. She didn't answer right away. Just looked at the floor. That's when I realized something before anyone said it out loud. I wasn't there anymore. The room felt different after that. Like time had paused around a space I used to occupy. Daniel stood still, confused, holding the second cup of coffee. No, he whispered. But there was no argument left to make with reality. Later he sat in my empty room. Everything I owned fit into a small drawer, a sweater, a worn photograph, and a folded piece of paper. He picked it up slowly, Eleanor's old letter, the one I had carried for decades without ever truly letting go. But there was something else now. A second note, my handwriting, shaky, small, honest. He read it silently. I used to think life was something I would understand later, but I understand now it only happens when you choose it. I finally lived before I died. Daniel didn't speak for a long time. He just sat there, holding 2 truths at once, one about loss, one about understanding. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window again. The same sound, the same world, but somehow not the same meaning anymore, because my story didn't end in success or failure. It ended in something quieter. Clarity. And for the first time in his life, Daniel didn't feel like he was listening to an old man's memories. He felt like he was being warned by them. And that was enough to change everything. I didn't sleep much after that morning, not because I was in shock, but because something inside me wouldn't stay still anymore. Henry's words kept repeating in my head like they had found a place to live there, not memories, warnings. The days after his passing felt strangely louder. Even silence felt different now, like it wasn't empty anymore, just full of things I had been ignoring. I went back to the nursing home in Boston a few more times, not because I expected anything to change, but because I felt like I had left something unfinished with him, and maybe with myself too. One afternoon I finally opened my laptop. I stared at the screen for a long time. I had been thinking about applying for a graduate program for years, and every time I had the same excuse. Not ready. But now that phrase sounded different. It sounded like Henry, so I applied. Just like that. No overthinking, no waiting for certainty, just action. My hands were shaking when I clicked submit, but for the first time I didn't stop myself. I also called my sister that week. We hadn't spoken properly in almost a year. Too many small misunderstandings turned into distance. I don't want that anymore, I told her. There was a pause. Then she said softly, "Neither do I." And just like that, something repaired itself that I thought was permanent. Henry's funeral was small, a few staff members, a few residents, me. That was it. No big ceremony, no dramatic speeches, just quiet respect. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't know what to say at first. My voice felt heavier than usual, but I remembered something he once told me, so I shared it. "Fear is expensive," I said. "It costs people the life they were meant to live." Nobody interrupted. Nobody needed to. After it ended, I stayed behind for a while. Everyone else left slowly, but I couldn't, because for the first time I understood what he had given me, not sadness, clarity. Later that evening, I found myself sitting on a bench outside the nursing home. The same place Henry used to sit every morning. Same view, same sky, different meaning. For a moment I closed my eyes, and I didn't feel lost. I didn't feel afraid. I felt aware of time, of choice, of how quietly life keeps moving whether you participate in it or not. And I realized something simple, but life-changing. Henry didn't just tell me his story. He handed me the responsibility of not repeating it. So I made a decision that day. Not a perfect one, not a safe one, but an honest one, to live while I still had time. Because in the end, Henry's story wasn't about death. It was about the cost of waiting and the courage it takes to stop.
Moral of the story: fear doesn't destroy life in one moment. It quietly replaces it one choice at a time. The end.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more real-life stories.